Welcome to the Trailbreaker Podcast. I'm Aaron Feinberg. In this podcast, I explore what it takes to be a trailbreaker. Through intimate conversations with people carving new paths across the landscapes of business, art, and sport, we dig in on how to excel across seemingly disparate endeavors. What drives people who manage to succeed multidimensionally? Is it how they think? Is it meticulous planning and follow-through? Or is it some measure of delusional optimism? My guest today is Seth Besse, CEO of Undivided, a former junior world champion windsurfer, and a perpetual explorer of what's around the next corner. We talked about how Undivided provides an entire support system for parents raising kids with disabilities, how dyslexia and ADHD has influenced his personal, professional, and parenting path, and why waiting until you feel qualified is a good way to go nowhere. Good afternoon, Seth. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this episode's a long time coming. I've been trying to get you on here to talk about yourself, which I know you love to do. But more importantly, I think I hooked you because it gives us a platform to talk about the amazing work you're doing at Undivided IO, which is a company you're a CEO of. So I do want to talk a lot about that. But I want to back us in first because you grew up as a kid with dyslexia, had some pretty good success in a number of different sports, worked in legal tech, and then somehow found your way into the CEO position at this startup. And so let's just back up, go back into young Seth world. What was it like growing up as a kid with dyslexia?
All the random endeavors. So a number of things. I mean, that's obviously a loaded question. I think the big part for me was always being a little bit behind on reading and other things like that, and not fully understanding why. I was talking to my wife last week about this because we're going through the process now with my own kids and trying to figure out how to kind of give them extra support and reading that they need. I mean, I remember, and I still have nightmares now in elementary school and middle school when you had to go around the room and read out loud, and I'd always count ahead the number of paragraphs for the kids that were in front of me, and I'd read it over and over and over and over again and try and memorize it. And usually it would work. Sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes I counted wrong, or someone got up and went to the bathroom and my whole thing was out the door, and I had to, read out loud to the whole class, and, hopelessly embarrassed.
Yeah. And I think kids can be all sorts of varying degrees of helpful or hurtful in those moments. I would imagine it's obviously it was personal for you. You didn't want to be embarrassed. Did you feel like you got critiques or bullying from kids because of it?
Looking back on it now, ironically, not really. At the time, I remember being mortified and feeling like I was going to get bullied. Part of it might have been that I was a relatively tall kid from a relatively young age. But certainly looking back on it, I don't remember anything super harsh. And I think a lot of it was, inward focused, me looking at it more than others noticing.
Yeah, for sure. And regardless, I mean, it's, you never know what's going on for somebody inside. And, as you transition through school, there's obviously varying levels of support. We always try to do the best we can for the kids around us. And there's always looking backwards, things we would have done differently. Anything that you've stumbled upon as an adult that's been helpful for you, like compensatory strategies or angles in that you've learned over the years to sort of help you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things with kind of dyslexia and ADHD that over the years I've learned. Certainly, there's also a number of things that in working with Undivided that I've learned about myself. So for years and years, I've sat on like a exercise yoga ball at my desk. Didn't understand that was really a technique and something that they do in IEPs until recently. Right. And so these are things that like over time you kind of stumble into and figure out works for you.
Interesting. And so what does it do for you?
Well, so the whole concept is it kind of engages a part of your brain so that the rest of you can focus on what you actually need to get done.
And as a kid, I know you've always been a sporty guy, but as a kid, what are the range of sports or activities that you were into?
Um, so, I mean, I guess, I did a bunch of team sports, obviously early on, soccer, lacrosse, all that kind of stuff. Um, I started getting to kind of what I would call alternative sports, extreme sports, what have you, largely through kind of my dad at the time was. I don't think my dad knows a single rule of football or soccer at this point. So he's always kind of been on the skiing, the windsurfing kind of side of things and kept pulling me into that side.
Yeah, interesting. Because, and I think you told me offline you'd always been and probably still are on the shyer side. And so, what was it like? Team sport versus those individual pursuits for you, and at least in that regard.
Yeah, definitely on the shy side. Staring eye contact right now is hard. So kind of the individual thing was always good for me. There's definitely a part of kind of me that didn't get along with that many coaches all that well. Getting along with teams, fine. Getting along with coaches was more difficult.
In a nutshell, what would you say was the reason?
Um, that points right back at me again. I think I've always had a hard time understanding kind of authority and hierarchy that way. And I actually had a conversation with one of my old bosses last year at some point where um, he said something to the effect of, "Now that you're CEO, it must be hard to still think your boss is an idiot." Um, and and I thought it was a good way to look at it.
Yeah, and I mean, how does it if you have a leadership approach, right? I don't know how you've melded those things, those individual pursuits with leading a team, with authority issues versus now being the authority.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess from my perspective, I have a hard time understanding corporate hierarchy. Part of that comes certainly from the fact that I've never been at a very large business. All of kind of my work experience has been relatively small organizations that to me at various times have felt massive. But a lot of that, if I feel like I have a good idea and I'm the most junior person in the room, I'm still going to let that known, right? And if I think the most senior person in the room has a horrible idea, I'm going to tell them it's a horrible idea, right? And I've always wanted to kind of foster that feeling internally in every team because everyone kind of has their own way of looking at things. And if you're quote unquote in charge, you still only have one small purview, and all of that information that other people are seeing is massively helpful. And if you don't have people around you that are willing to tell you you're making a mistake, then you've made a mistake.
Yeah, and so let's just assume, for conversation's sake, you've got a bunch of people who are on the shire side that you're leading, right? Do you do anything specifically to help them know that that's not only wanted but expected and encouraged?
Yeah, I guess I haven't thought about that too much. I think I do, in that I'm constantly trying to get that feedback. And a lot of people would say the concept of, skip level meetings and things like that. I've never even thought of the fact that there's levels, so levels to skip. And so just always reaching out, trying to get more and more feedback from more and more people. Obviously, that doesn't work at a 60,000 person company. Right. And so I've been lucky that way, that kind of where I've been has been an environment that we can foster that.
And so, looking at the different roles and the different industries you're obviously in a particular field now, which we'll get deeper into in a minute. But before that, you were in legal tech, and so what was that like, and what drew you into that?
Yeah. So now that you're saying that, I realize that most things in my life I've done by mistake. So so to get into legal tech, entirely by mistake, not my choice at all. So that all started because I was windsurfing a bunch, traveling around the world, doing an Olympic campaign at the time, but getting towards the end of college and having the future professional freak out of needing an internship to be able to be employable in the future. And there was a guy that windsurfed a bunch around here. Got talking to him. He was doing a consultancy, helping a bunch of startups, rewriting business plans, doing pitch decks, that type of stuff. I started working for him largely because he trusted me because he knew me from windsurfing. Worked for him on a number of projects. And then one day he came to me and said, "Hey, this is a patent. Here's how you read a patent. Read it. Tell me who it's relevant to." And that spiraled into him starting a consultancy focused on doing patent valuation and patent evaluation. So reading a patent, who potentially infringes this patent, so on and so forth. So totally stumbled into it, was not a choice at all in any way, shape, or form, but entirely sure, okay, this is a patent. I can figure out what that means and figure out who's likely doing this type of activity and technology.
And what about that role was spot on and interesting, or like kind of matched with your strengths, and anything that was like really sidebar and a struggle?
In terms of kind of the struggle of it, obviously, me sitting down and reading a 20-page document, not exactly my forte. Somehow able to go through and skim that pretty quickly. And then, one of the things that I heard recently about dyslexia is it's the ability to look at things different than a large chunk of the population. The side effect is we spell things wrong. And so a lot of that concept of digesting things and not really understanding the concept that I wasn't qualified for this, I think helps kind of take a fresh eyes approach at this.
Interesting. And I think if I'm remembering one of these conversations on our way to surf, I feel like you were talking to me a bit about some of the other features of dyslexia that maybe people don't always know. And I think you were talking about how like the way you perceive social situations sometimes. Am I right on that? Am I remember this?
A little bit, yeah. So I get myself confused in terms of kind of what's ADHD, what's dyslexia, things like that. Some of the things that I've learned kind of over the last few years that I just thought were me are often associated with that. So, for example, when you're at a cocktail party or something like that, you may not be able to hear a conversation that we're having just like this, and it's not because my ears don't work well or I have surfer's ear or what have you. It's because my brain's thinking about a conversation over there and eavesdropping on that conversation as opposed to being here. And so there's a number of things like that that have been interesting over time to realize that it's not a me thing. It's more of a dyslexia and ADHD thing.
Super interesting. And then in terms of getting through, obviously you're, again, how you feel inside versus how you show up outside as someone who obviously sees you in the social world. I wouldn't even guess some of these things are happening for you. So what have you done to help yourself kind of navigate these social situations more fluidly or more easily for yourself? Other than like avoid them altogether.
Yeah. So avoid them altogether was going to be the answer. I think the truth is, my wife, Jack, is a pretty social person. So hanging out with her, that's not really an option. So forced repetition and practice, we'll say.
Yeah, I don't think we'd be sitting here if she didn't set up this funny little mandate. I met her at the school, and we were talking about joint love of nature in Jackson Hole, and then she's like, "You got to meet my husband."
Yeah,
And I think she
does. She does that.
Up. Yeah,
she does that.
She's your best advocate.
Yes,
she's your navigator.
She is
Jack the navigator. I will give you a shout out. In your parenting, I was walking to go pick our my kid up at our school, and I saw your little one on the playground, and another kid had just eaten it off of the monkey bars, and in comes yours to just check on her to see how she's doing. All the other kids looked at the kid on the ground, being like, and your daughter came running up to just check on her. So whatever you're doing, you're teaching her empathy.
It's not me. It's all Jack.
Jack the Navigator.
Yeah.
Anything like as a never stepped foot on a windsurfer, steered clear of kiteboarding because the idea of having to like untangle knots is a nightmare for me, much less doing it in the water. No, thank you. But like any of those skills that you would say translate to anything related to business, right? I don't know that there is a connection, but like obviously you spend a lot of time doing those things, and sometimes skills that are useful in one part of our life wind up later on being the exact thing we needed. Anything that you'd say is a good connector?
Yeah. So I grew up sailing a ton before kind of switching over to really primarily focusing on windsurfing. And I still do a bunch of what I call sit down sailing. And, I think that obviously is a, very privileged sport, so on and so forth. But it is one of those sports that you have to focus on so many different variables at once. And in terms of kind of understanding where nature, where wind direction, where speed, all of that comes together, it's a really dynamic sport to put all that together. So I think that's been a big thing that, in my experience, people that are good sailors into kind of that curiosity frame are pretty good athletes from kind of a work perspective and can handle a lot of different challenges.
Yeah, there's a term that somebody threw out, like a corporate athlete.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And it seems like from afar you're a guy who doesn't mind a good struggle either, right? I'll look at your Stravas every now and again, and it's like, oh, he's trail running. I know he hates that, or just some ridiculous jaunt through the mountains for 10 hours or what have you. That always been a part of your personality too.
Yeah, I guess I don't think of it as struggle. I think of it as stubbornness. There's stubbornness, and there's a little bit of just always wanting to see what's around the next corner and what can happen, right? And I think it's kind of that optimism that needs to come with anyone that has a background of a whole bunch of random endeavors, that if you slow down and stop yourself when you're unqualified to do something, you're not going to do anything.
That should be the quote for this show. I mean, the way of the delusional optimist is pretty good, but you just came up with a second. Thinking about the work you're all doing now at Undivided, right? What was it like when you got shoulder tapped to take the leadership position there?
Yeah. So that was interesting. I wasn't really expecting that. So Jason Lembeck, the original founder, had kind of been working through the process. He comes at it from a very personal side, where he has a son with a rare genetic condition that manifests as cerebral palsy. And so he started the company for a whole bunch of reasons that are not lost to the members that work with Undivided, right? The stress, the time it takes to raise a child with significant needs. Jason stepped aside and said, "Tap, you're it." And for me, I kind of take a slightly different approach on this, a little outsider's perspective, where kind of building the set of data and information and really focusing on how we scale that as a business is the key thing that I really focused on early on. And that's the piece that we've continued to hammer on and kind of move forward as we see continued growth now.
Got it. And then please cut me off if I misspeak on this, but it's a platform, or it's basically technology, right?
Yeah.
Supporting families with kids with disabilities, and you've got real live humans, as they call them, parent navigators, right?
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about those parents.
Yeah. So before I get into that, I'll give a little bit about the platform and just the problem generally. So, if you think about all these systems that parents need to navigate, right? And so if you're a parent raising a typically developing child, you have no idea what an IEP is. You have no idea what regional center is. You have no idea what an IPP is. There's a million different 3 and 4 letter acronyms that are thrown at a parent, right? And right now, or kind of before us, what really was happening was the equivalent of saying to parents, "Hey, you got to file your taxes, and we're not going to give you anything but this 20,000 page tax code. Go figure it out. Right. And so every parent was starting from scratch, going through this whole process. So really what we've done is we've taken all that information and we've centralized it. And that's where our navigators are kind of key to what we do, in that our navigators work with parents on, it's not a small set, but it's not an infinite set of challenges and problems that they're working on. And every time a parent hits a roadblock, our navigators document that process for us, and then document how they overcame it. And so all of that information then goes into our written content and gets built into our platform. And so all of that centralization of knowledge allows parents to not start from scratch. And so when a parent comes in, we build that roadmap for them, and they understand not only is this roadmap educated by, what's legally they qualify for, but it's educated by the experience of parents that have had these same challenges in the past.
I mean, prior to this work as an executive coach and leadership trainer, I worked as a psychologist in public schools in Silicon Valley. And I can say that, like, there's so much need. There's so much need. It's so long. It's so arduous, that path. And, to your point around what these parents are dealing with, it's like any disability, much less a child with multiple disabilities, and everything that you're doing to care for them and to love them, and any emotional reactions you're having, and like the supports you get or the supports you can't find, or the answers you get that are like maybe not quite right, or nobody's been there before. I mean, I love the term navigator, because I think that yeah, having that guide, having that person to sort of help you along the path is so huge, and there's not enough help anywhere. So I think this is amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's if you think about the problem generally, right? There's about 17% of kids have some sort of intellectual or developmental disability, right? Whether that's learning differences or more complex cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. And that, if you think about that 17%, in that, it breaks down pretty significantly. So we can't ask teachers, and we don't provide teachers the time to get enough training to focus on something that's going to help that 17% that then splinters from there, right? And so when parents rely on teachers on information from the school, frankly, the training hasn't happened to get the school up to speed. So parents kind of miss out on so much of it, just from, frankly, if it's misinformation or just not mentioning that certain services, certain things are available.
Yeah, there's just, it's multi-layered. I don't think it's ill-intended. It's just, you've got to be an expert in so many different things, and some of these things are so complicated. You just can't, there's no way one person can do it, or even agencies can do it. So in terms of how folks access what you're doing at Undivided, so say I'm a parent with a child in need, what do I do?
Yeah. So right now, parents are paying directly. So they're paying either for access to our platform, or to work with their navigator on a monthly basis. We're working on a number of different other payment pathways for parents. One being through Regional Center in California, which is a kind of public funds that help pay for services for parents. Another is we're working with a number of large employers to try and figure out how we offer this as an employee benefit.
That's great. And in terms of number of folks currently working, I'm just curious at the size of Undivided at the moment.
Yeah, so we have basically 300 families that are working with the navigator on a monthly basis, and then we have at this point a couple thousand people that are on our kind of platform offering.
Cool. And maybe you don't have a good answer for this, but if you were to think about how you want to scale it over the next year or two, any sort of moonshot you're looking for?
Yeah. So right now we're focused in California, largely because kind of as you look state by state, the public benefits are a little different. And so right now we're really focused on California. The goal is to be, at several thousand families on the platform offering in California, really having kind of stable and consistent growth here before we start expanding state by state. We've already started the process of kind of starting to field the team in places like Massachusetts and identify some partners in New York as well that have written a bunch of content that can kind of be the foundation of a starting point. But that's the goal over the next year, is to really get California nailed and then start expanding state by state.
If you were to sort of wave your magic wand, if you were to, get something that would help you all, what would really support you into getting to the next level?
Yeah, so I mean, it's ironic, I guess, but the same concept that we are helping families navigate the different payment systems and all of this that are available to them is our biggest challenge right now. So we're obviously, as we set up additional payment pathways for families, and that involves public benefits and things like that, we ourselves need to navigate those systems. And so a lot of it is just getting through that process to get kind of critical mass. The other challenge for us is, frankly, kind of battling the misinformation from parents. I have conversations, it seems daily, with parents that say, "Oh, this is fantastic. I wish I had this 5 years ago. I don't know that I need it right now, but you mentioned this thing about this. What's that?" Right? The truth is that we're battling kind of the unknown problem, in that the parents that know they need help, great. They reach out to us. We can get them going and help them. It's the parents that think they have everything set up. And the reality is, no parent, no matter how much time you're spending on it, how long you've been working on, is going to have everything set up and know every trick in the book. Right. And so that's really what we're here for. And, as we bring in more and more navigators, it's been interesting for me to watch that we bring in a navigator who's also an IEP advocate, has been in this space for years and years and years, comes incredibly well recommended, is published, and blah, 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 blah. And they still come in and they learn, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I'm going to do that for my own family." Right. So it's really just that concept of centralizing that information, and that knowledge, to get parents to the next level.
Super, super cool. Keep up the good work. And so, pulling it back a little bit to the granular level, when you think about just an average day CEO at this company, like what's the range of stuff you're getting your hands into? Because obviously, and I bring it up because you've been a guy who bounces in so many different places. So what's an average day, if there is one for you?
Um, Yeah, I don't know if there is one. I mean, I end up doing, we obviously have a big push right now to get more and more on the platform offering itself. So a lot of what I've been doing kind of over the last few weeks is really deep product and engineering work with the team to get that work going. But then I'll bounce back and do a bunch of content prioritization work, and then I'll bounce back and do a bunch of kind of business development stuff. I mean, this morning, um, it's noon, and this morning started my day at 7 a.m. with, talking to a mom that needs some help and reached out, then spoke to two different regional centers about getting vendored with them, then worked with the engineering team on daily stand up and a bunch of priority stuff. Right. So it's all, your average day is all over the map.
Yeah, and does that fit with
Oh,
your?
it's perfect.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I would want it no other way.
Yeah, there's this concept that we used to try to explain to parents when I was working in the schools, and it's just like you know, regardless of the person and their strengths and weaknesses, it's just like sometimes it's the environment that they're in. And so, whatever environment you're in, sometimes your particular skill set just doesn't fit with it, right? And so, you find that environment where your exact combination of strengths fits with that environment. I think it's much easier to look at finding that environment than it is, or much more joyful to find that environment than to go, damn, I don't fit, right? I don't fit where. And I think that we have these cultural norms and these expectations, and I think pulling back and looking at the broader environments, ecosystems for kids is really good, because there's lots of ways to be successful in the structure, and I think our thankfully our world is only getting more maybe educated on the
Yeah.
different paths. It's a little less linear.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of, if you just look at school, right? We've built a school system at scale. You can say we've done a good job of that in this country. You can say we've done a bad job of it. But we've built a process that doesn't fit for every kid. right? And there's, like I said earlier, there's 17% of the population that we know that doesn't fit for. The challenge is that 17%, it's not like this other model would fit that, right? It all has to be kind of customized to kids. And so it really is all about finding that environment and that space where, someone has that strength and that ability to respond to it.
Nice. And so if you could describe your headspace when you're, whether it's on that one man sailboat or whether that's windsurfing or kiteboarding out at Ocean Beach, like when you're in your perfect sort of locked in space where like everything feels good, you're doing exactly where is that place for you?
Yeah. Funny, I was talking to someone about this concept the other day. So I end up running a lot just because it's quick and efficient. I end up riding my mountain bike a lot because it's quicker and more efficient than other things. But both of those don't take 100% of your focus and attention. And there's some things that for me are kind of key. And kite surfing for me is one of those things that every once in a while you fully are in the moment and there's nothing else on your mind. You're not thinking about work. You're not thinking about anything. The same happens frequently with skiing, right? Where there's moments in time when everything else fades away. For me, I think that's a really important way to kind of unplug and be in the moment. And it's forced mindfulness, shall we say.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's, as we get into our older years, it sometimes can feel like a luxury to be able to do those things. And I think that for a lot of us and maybe even more, it's it's important, right? It's an important strategy to be your best and successful. And I think it's a good thing to teach the kids. And I was going to ask you, obviously I get to see your kids at school because they go with my daughter, but now being a dad, you know, do you have a parenting philosophy? Like you're working with a lot of parents, right, who have their own struggles. You're human, or you have your own parenting struggles, etc. What's your parenting philosophy for your own kids?
Yeah, you're asking me all sorts of questions.
That's what this show's all about.
Oh, got it. So I guess kind of my philosophy with them is to really inspire curiosity. And so I feel like a lot of how things are taught today and communicated is much more, this is how it is. Don't scratch the surface, don't look underneath. And really it's been fun with my kids as they grow up. I actually love when I'm kind of bummed that they're a little bit out of the why phase, because I loved going down why rabbit holes and answering every question with full honesty. Because it's a fun way to kind of get that curiosity. And it still blows my mind when my kids will ask me a question about something that I answered in like a why rabbit hole 2 years ago. Right. And like clearly all of that is kind of going in, and the curiosity of how to take things apart, how to put them back together, all that is, I think, really important for kids and has been for me a lot of fun with my own kids.
Awesome. Yeah, I can see it. And then I think the kids teach us and challenge us in different ways. What have you seen about yourself that maybe you hadn't learned before your two little ones?
Yeah. So I guess I used to consider myself a very impatient person. And having kids, ironically, instead of aggravating that part of me, has made me considerably more patient, which has kind of been an interesting transformation.
Yeah, I've seen that in myself too. I don't know that that translates to anybody other than my daughter. I still think I'm pretty damn impatient, and I would also
I have
say,
that same problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like she's lucky. I mean,
Yeah.
except she'll probably tell you something else. Um, but yeah, I see that for sure in myself. I also think that being the product of a father who's a psychologist and a mother who's a counselor, nobody would have guessed that I would have become a school psychologist. In fact, when I decided to go that route, everyone was like, "You are so impatient and uninterested in hearing about anybody's thoughts. How are you going to be good at this?" And it turns out, like I was like locked in, and somehow I put all my energy into it. I'm not sure I was any good after the end of the day, but it's amazing what you can put your energy towards. And then I guess kind of in wrapping up, you know, if you were to think about, and again, as a guy also who doesn't stay in one place too long, I don't know that I would have an answer for this question either. But assuming you get Undivided to where, it's rocking and rolling, or rock and rolling more, any sort of dreams, aspirations for the next sort of like 10, 15 years of work? Or is it like, let's get this done and let me just retire and windsurf?
No, not at all. So at the moment, retiring and going surfing sounds pretty good. But in reality, like I said earlier, everything I've done is kind of by mistake. And so like getting into patents, which then led into the whole legal tech world, which led into meeting the people that introduced me into Jason, which is how I ended up at Undivided, all that stuff. So Undivided, we have a ton of work to do, right? This is an incredibly large, but incredibly broken space that every year is getting a little more attention. And so it's getting more and more feasible to really, fix the root problems. So ton of work to do. If, magically we knock it out of the park and we nail it and we fix all the world's problems here, what's next? I have no idea. My guess is that it'll be another total left turn. And, part of that I think is really, I have a lot of fun learning about something from scratch, right? And being able to ramp up in a relatively short period of time and kind of becoming an expert in that space when, it doesn't, from my resume, make any sense whatsoever.
Perfect. Well, look, I think that is a fantastic way to end. I wish you guys all the best in the work that you're doing over there. Keep it up. The world needs it. And whatever trails you break moving forward, it'd be interesting to see where you wind up.
Yeah, let's break some trails.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, my friend, and have a good rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.
The Trailbreaker podcast is created by Aaron Feinberg with production support provided by Michael Morey. More interviews and videos can be found at aaronfeinberg.com.